It is now time for our panel. Please welcome to the stage Lieutenant General Brian T. Kelly, President and CEO of the Military Officers Association of America, Danny Vargas, Chair, CEO, and founder of the American Latino Veterans Association, Allison Jaslow, CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, Jennifer Silva, U.S. Army veteran and Chief Program Officer at Wounded Warrior Project, and Cindy Noel, Assistant Director of Field Operations at the VFW's National Veterans Service. Welcome all.
Thank you. Okay, a lot of experts on this panel. Why don't we go down the line? Introduce yourself and your affiliation and what you're passionate about. What's the lead of why you're here today?
Yeah, so Brian Kelly. I am the President and CEO of the Military Officers Association of America. I spent 33 and a half years in the United States Air Force, retired from the position of the Deputy Chief of Staff for Manpower, Personnel, and Services. And as I had an opportunity to transition, and this position was open at MOA, I found out that my passion was that MOA's mission has been for 95 years now to preserve and protect the earned benefits. It was great when Eric talked about that earlier, the earned benefits of the military and uniformed services community. Those who are serving, those who have served, our veterans, their families, our survivors. And so the fact that that's MOA's mission and what we do every day really drives me and gives me excitement.
Very nice. Yeah.
So I'm Danny Vargas. I'm the founder, chairman, and CEO of the American Latino Veterans Association, also a fellow Air Force veteran myself. I founded the organization because I think it's important to begin to change the narrative and tell the stories of Latino contributions to the military from the Revolutionary War to today, and to help the 1.5 million Latino veterans in our country thrive. We're about 9% of the total veteran population today. By 2046, we'll be 16% of the veteran population. We are right now about 19% of the active duty force, 25% of the Marine Corps, but only 8% of the Officer Corps and less than 3% of the flag officers. So we need to do more to make sure that we're helping that population thrive and telling their important stories.
My name is Allison Jaslow. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. I am a U.S. Army and Iraq War veteran myself. This is the second time I've been in a leadership role at IAVA. I was last at the organization from 2016 to 2018, but I've been CEO since this past March. We are the leading voice and the leading advocacy organization for the post 9/11 generation of veterans. And to your point about what inspires me today is I actually think that one of the great privileges of leading IAVA in this moment that we're in right now is that the post 9/11 generation of veterans are ascendant in America today. You're seeing that on Capitol Hill here in Washington, but also in the private sector. And I think it's a really exciting time for our generation to be in a position to lead when America needs us most.
Great, thanks for having me. Jennifer Silva, I'm the Chief Program Officer at Wounded Warrior Project. I am an Army veteran, served in the 90s, and really what we are passionate about is changing the way that veterans are cared for in this country and ensuring that they have access to the best world-class care. And we also have a big ground game of direct programs to the warriors and families that we serve across the country and internationally. So we have a mix of that plus our advocacy efforts and really being the voice of the wounded, injured, and ill veterans who have served post 9/11. So we're grateful to just be in the fight. I've been there 16 years, and I get passionate about that big goal of changing the way that veterans are cared for.
Good morning, everyone. I am Cindy Noel. I am the Assistant Director of Field Operations for the VFW. So I manage the pre-discharge claims representatives who sit on the military bases and process all the pre-discharge claims for active duty service members. I am here because I was one of the people sitting in a TAP class in 2014 when I decided to retire within 7 months because I did not want to go to a military installation where my 8-year-old would be exposed to meth in a military community. And so I decided to retire in 7 months. My, at the time, general said, go see a guy on Andrews Air Force Base. And I went to see a guy, and that guy is now my director at the VFW. And that guy sat down with me and went through every page of my medical records. And he helped me file my VA claim. And after that day, he was like, do you want a job? I was like, no, I just want to go be a mom. And, and I decided to become a B2D rep, or a pre-discharge claims rep. And for the past 10 years, I've been serving the community at Camp Lejeune, and I'm now the assistant director managing the team. But essentially, I've just been paying it forward, right? I've been helping active duty service members do what this guy did for me 10 years ago. And that's why I'm here, making certain that when someone is leaving the military, they're prepared, they're ready, and when they leave, they get the benefits they deserve.
Along those lines, and you're all veterans, thank you for your service. Cindy, you mentioned your personal experience. I just want to open up to anyone else and want this to be a free-flowing discussion, so jump right in. But as far as anyone else, their personal experience of being a veteran and how it's helped them do their job now, to understand, yeah, I get it. Not to say non-veterans can't get it, but, well, they don't have the perspective you guys do. Who wants to jump in on that one?
Well, one of the things that we see is that transition from active duty is there's a sense of purpose that is lost. And I want to make sure that even though I served pre-9/11, in my transition was, I was not in combat. In my transition into the civilian workforce, that loss of purpose was a problem. So what Eric mentioned earlier, that really resonated with me. In ensuring that especially women warriors, we find that they are least recognized for their service, and they have about a 10K pay gap annually. And so we want to make sure that transition, they bring all of those great skills that Eric mentioned to the workforce. They have a great work ethic, they know how to project manage, they know how to forecast, all those things in work as part of a team being the biggest thing. All of us, this is said across the whole space, all of us believe that transition could start earlier while they're in active duty uniform, and then help make sure that transition is really successful, because the nation is better for it when they transition well.
Sorry, Brian, did I?
No, good. No, good.
I served in the Army, but I'll steal a phrase from the Marines: adapt, improvise, and overcome. And I think that building kind of that resiliency in our service members is something that is very valuable these days, where you see disruption everywhere.
Right.
To Jen's point, also melding that with finding a new sense of purpose is definitely important post-service. But I do think that service members have had to endure hardship and also figure out how to come back from it in a way that many of our civilian peers haven't, and is super valuable. It's it's those traits that aren't necessarily on your resume,
right,
but also allow you to deal with the unexpected things that are coming at you in the world today.
Yeah,
right.
The one thing I would add, Bob, I would just say, broaden it out a little bit, right? So we think of veterans, I think we've talked a lot about how important it absolutely is, the transition period, but making a good veteran starts when we start recruiting them for service, right? The entire experience, from the very first time we start their recruiting, how we deal with them while they're serving, how they're led, what the quality of life is for their family, how they transition, how they get VA health care, how they make a final transition. All those things matter in what I call an ecosystem of the community as to how we take care of those folks. And not only is it important from a veteran perspective, but if we think of that ecosystem and how important it is to the nation to have volunteers to serve, the most important thing is that those experiences they have, each of those places, during transition afterwards, are powerful enough for them and positive enough for them. Not that there isn't sacrifice. Military service comes with sacrifice. We all know that. There's going to be. But on balance, if it's positive enough, they're going to recommend to the next person. When they talk to the kid down the block and they're talking and asking about military service, they're going to tell them about it. When a family member is talking to another family member about what their experience is, it'll become important enough that they say, I recommend you serve, right? And I think that's what becomes really powerful, looking at it as a whole ecosystem, and not just from the transition period, but from the very start to the end, makes great veterans.
Danny, I saw you shaking your head there.
I would add that in addition to resilience and all the other items, it would be a sense of maturity and responsibility. We're asking young people, 19, 20, 21-year-olds, to be responsible for other people's lives and to be responsible for the millions of dollars worth of equipment that's out there and the intelligence that's gathered and so forth. So there's a lot of responsibility that's gained at a young age that these young people are able to take with them into their civilian lives. But there's also a mission focus. So among the soft skills that we talk about is that ability to work as a team, to be focused on the mission. The challenge, though, comes with when they do transition to civilian careers, that mission focus also has to transition to self-focus, right? At least in the community that I serve, for example, once they do their service and get out, they don't think about their needs. They don't think that it's incumbent upon them to seek out the benefits that they've earned because they've already done their duty and they've served their service. So they need to transition not just that mission focus, but also focusing on themselves and doing what they need to make sure that they're healthy and that they've accessed the benefits that they've earned.
Cindy?
But this is why having the pre-discharge claims reps on the installations is so important. Because if you leave it up to the individual to exit the military and then think about the benefits afterward, they may never get to it, right? Because let's be fair, let's be clear. People transition for various reasons. They may have a family emergency, they may have a horrible commander, they may have a horrible first sergeant, they may have a horrible experience in the military, and they're like, I just want to get out of here. And so they hurry up, they sit through TAP because it's mandatory, they're not paying attention. Listen, I have sat through TAP classes from start to finish. I've literally sat through it from a Monday through Friday. I've made it my business to sit there and watch the service members, and some of them are paying attention and some of them are not, right? They're absorbing it and they're not. So the ones who are rushing to get out of here, if we don't have someone in there, this is why the VFW is so, pushing the TAP Promotion Act. We need to be in the room. The veteran service officers, we need to be in the room sharing what we do, telling service members to file their claims, telling them about the benefits that are available to them, so that when they transition out, it helps to tamp down on houselessness, right? Food insecurity, because you have someone E4, they're getting out, they may not be able to go back home, right? They don't know how they're gonna eat. They may not be going to school like the congressman said. He went to grad school, but not everybody get a chance to go to grad school, go to college. So we have to make sure before they leave the service, they have an opportunity to get access to these benefits that the VA has for them.
Mm-hmm. Danny, I just want to go to you as far as Latinos and having a hard time getting benefits. How has that changed, maybe improved, and where do we need to go?
So part of it is cultural. That humility that I talked about earlier, that sense of being focused just on the mission, just on the job, not on yourself. So we have to overcome that. I think the other aspect of it is, the way that you communicate with that population has some nuance to it. You're probably better off communicating with a family member as opposed to directly with the veteran, because they are so humble, but the family member will force them to go in and try to access their benefits. But I do think that it's important that we find ways to be able to engage them in ways that are meaningful. So they over-index in social media, for example, and radio. So being able to communicate with them in the traditional means that the general veteran population may not be as effective with that population. But it's a large and growing population. So as I said earlier, it's going to be 19% of the veteran population by 2046. So we need to be more proactive and intentional about communicating with that population.
Brian, can you talk about an issue that's going to be a problem for a while, recruitment challenges?
Yeah, I think, we've been talking about, so Danny's talking about influencers in the Latino community, but influencers in general are recommending military service. So this is people who have served, people who are serving, your parents, your neighbors are recommending military service to the next generation at alarmingly lower levels than they used to. I think we went from 74% of those who were serving or had served recommending military service to 59% in a 2 or 3 year period. And the idea here of making sure those influencers, or our recruiters do a great job,
right,
but the real people who really do a great job are the influencers. And so making sure those influencers had a good experience or visualize a good experience for service is really important. As I was saying before, this idea of it being a complete continuum is important to us. And so one of the things that we're going to do at MOA is we're going to hold a conference that we call Total Force Plus. And this Total Force Plus conference is going to be basically that discussion from beginning to end, from recruiting all the way through veteran care. It's going to have a forum for academia, industry, DOD leaders, VA leaders, our VSO and MSO leaders, our rank and file members out there to come and have conversations about how do we advance solutions so that the experience you have through that entire spectrum is positive, so that you will, when it's your turn, you will tell that next person, yes, you should join, right? When you become the influencer or your family watches your experience. Now, again, there's lots of potential challenges out there, and we have great organizations who are there to help those folks who are there. But veterans can be thriving as well. It's not all, we're not all broken and we're not all those places. But if we are, we've got great organizations and great ways to help them out. But if we do that and bring that ecosystem together, which is why we're going to have this Total Force Plus conference in October of 2025, we think we can start to have the conversations that change the influencers so that they will start recommending military service at a higher rate again, and now your retention, your recruiting will go back up.
Along those lines, anyone else want to jump in as far as getting the word out, what Brian said, holding conferences, having events like this, but you have a legacy media that's becoming less and less important. Kids, including mine, get a lot of their news on TikTok. How do your organizations get the word out, and how has that changed, and how is that going to change over the next 5-10 years, Allison?
For recruitment?
Yeah.
I'd say a couple of things. One, first, I'm a big believer in the fact that the cultural zeitgeist in America drives a lot. So it would be great if we were still in the era where everybody's grandfather served, but we're not anymore. But if Hollywood puts out more Top Gun Mavericks, recruitment will, it makes military service look sexy, right?
Is that, do you see the movie Sideways? I was in Napa Valley, and they said after Sideways came out, sales of Merlot went way down because the character hates that Merlot. Right. But I mean, is it that powerful that you see the numbers just pop when something like that hits?
I mean, I'm not working over at the Pentagon, but I do think it's helpful. And if you ask people in the Department of the Air Force, they actually did see a spike when Top Gun Maverick came out in recruitment. It makes it more real. If you didn't grow up in a military community or a part of a military family, you're just very disconnected from the experience. You don't, it's the old saying, you can't be what you can't see, right? And so if you don't see it, then you can't envision it as a career path for yourself. But to your point also about TikTok, we are very proud to be a partner of TikTok right now. We launched our specific TikTok account last November, last Veterans Day. And I think if you want to really meet people where you're at, it's important for our advocacy work. But I was actually joking with the folks at TikTok. I was like, if we're out there and IEVA is making being a vet, military service cool because of the population that is TikTok first, if you will, we'll actually probably help the military with their recruitment, issues, because they'll be seeing content from vets about military service in their news feeds in a way that could actually help the Pentagon as they're also debating sort of the national security risks of TikTok, et cetera.
Jennifer, what do wounded warriors need? You talked about access before. Expound upon that maybe people don't realize. And one of the things that I want to get from this panel is kind of when you see public officials or policymakers, what do you want them to get that maybe they don't get?
Well, we're grateful to have been really investing heavily in mental health care from the get-go. We consider ourselves as a stopgap in filling in gaps where the VA may have some issues getting them access to care. First of all, we believe that it should be really great world-class care. And I think that is provided both in the VA and outside the VA within our Warrior Care Network and other providers. And we need to strike when the iron's hot. When a veteran raises their hand and says, I'm ready to get treatment, I'm ready to get some help, we need to be ready and agile. And that's what I mean by access. So standards that help, especially in areas like our RTP, residential rehabilitation treatment programs, where it's a tough case, and we need to be able to get them into those treatment programs within 48 hours or whatever the standard is, and make sure there's clarity across the enterprise. Those are some things that we find that are very important, and the VA can't do it alone, we can't do it alone. We have a very big investment in direct mental health care, but it could be light. Maybe the warrior or the family member needs some light mental health care, some adjustment things. But then when they need that acute care, we need to make sure as a community we know where to go, we know how to get them access to care. Oftentimes it is working with their spouse or their caregiver, and getting it as a friendly option
Right.
into that. And one of our approaches is we have a lot of connection programs. Get them in, have trust built, and then kind of get to know them, interview them, motivationally interview them, and then get them into the care that they need. We serve a population, over 90% of the warriors that we serve are using VA healthcare. And so we are a true partner with the VA in that, ensuring that when we have programs that are appropriate for them, we're also advocating for them to go back and use the VA as well.
Anyone else want to jump in as far as VA healthcare? Terrence obviously talking about how the program is great, and there have been a lot of comparisons GAO has done to other healthcare programs, and it does rate very well.
Yeah.
But maybe Cindy, what do you think, and what do you think it could be enhanced?
I think what I see dealing with the active duty community as they're transitioning out, a lot of service members, when they're going through specifically TAP class, you know, they're taught to register. However, a lot of times they don't. And so when they transition out, they reach back to us as their VSOs, and they're like, well, what do I do about healthcare? And we're like, well, you have to register. So we walk them through going into their local VA clinic, taking their DD-214 with them, and registering for healthcare. Oftentimes, the service members, they're thinking, well, I don't have a disability rating, so I can't have VA healthcare, and that's not true. You know, you served, you can walk in, you can register. And I tell them, even if the person at the front desk in the VA clinic may not know the correct information, call me back, right? Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, listen, ask to speak to someone else. So a lot of time it's misinformation. Sometimes I actually got an email from a captain. I did his claim, and he's like, what do I do about TRICARE? Sir, you know, there's no more TRICARE. So a lot of times service members are transitioning out and they do not have the right information. So I had to let them know, you get VA healthcare, but guess what? He's overseas. He's now living in Switzerland. So that's a whole nother thing that has to open up, because he has VA healthcare, but now you have to introduce the VA foreign medical program that he now has to battle with, because he is not going to be able to get treatment for some things that he may not be service connected for. So VA healthcare works if you have the information, if you know how to walk through the process. And I share with transitioning service members, you get more bees with honey than vinegar.
Right.
So don't walk in there screaming and yelling at anyone. Just be kind and ask the right questions.
Right.
And so that's my job, and the VDD, our pre-discharge team's job, is to say, listen, here are the questions you need to ask. And our job, our goal, you know, the VFW, we just try to walk everyone through this transition process, because guess what? This is the first time, and it's probably going to be the last time that everyone is going to do this, and we're going to walk you through it. We're going to, you know, make sure you do it right.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, but one of the things about VA healthcare, I think, and I was really pleased to hear Senator Moran talk about the PACT Act and talk about it was good that we did, but now you actually have to deliver on all the things that are there. One of the things that we've been trying to work on at MOA, and we've been partnered with the Disabled American Veterans, DAV folks, is, so how do you take what we did in the PACT Act, but make sure that you're improved on it for the next time? And so we created this blueprint called Ending the Wait. If you looked at, it was 31 and a half years between exposure to care. That's too long. That's way too long, right? And so how do you reduce that time frame down, and how do you make sure that the next exposure, that we don't have to wait another 31 and a half years, and you have a blueprint, you have a way to go through and make sure that that timeline is put down, and that the VA healthcare, who's doing a great job on the PACT Act, is prepared for the next thing, right? So you don't have to wait for Agent Orange and whatever that's going to be. And can you give DOD some formulas and ways to make sure that they're prepared when they have exposures, which they're going to have, to make sure the next group of people are there. And so when the 119th Congress gets in place, we're going to be working with Senator Moran and everybody else on how do you take what we did in the PACT Act and now blueprint it forward to make sure you can prevent things from lasting 31 and a half years before you get care next time.
Danny, I want to ask you, we're in Washington 1 week from the election. Latinos moved convincingly toward Trump. Without getting into too much the politics of it, but what do you make of that? Because this is a demographic that is so important in the country, right, and it's growing, as you mentioned earlier, right, and now it's becoming politically more powerful. And what's the meaning of all that?
Well, I would say one thing. The there is no single Latino community in the country. It's a very diverse community, 23, 24 different countries of origin, but it's also not monolithic, right? So lots of different views, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and they will sway depending on the candidate, depending on the issues that are top of mind at the moment. But I also think that it's important that we find ways to be able to address the issues that are of concern, not just during the upcoming election, but year-round, right? There are too many instances where parties and candidates and campaigns will swoop in September and try to capture a portion of that vote. No, it's not going to work. And I think parties are beginning to learn that it's got to be a year-round engagement, not just outreach, right? There's a difference. And so I think the results of this past election will prove that that level of engagement is not just beneficial, it's essential for any future elections. And I think that we're driven primarily by the economy. I think that's, at the end of the day, it's the price of eggs and those kitchen table type issues. But I will say, going back to the previous question in terms of the VA, I think the VA does a great job communicating with folks that are already part of the system.
Right.
The challenge are the folks that are sort of untethered to the system, which is a portion of my population. And to Cindy's point, once they get out, to try to get back in and access those benefits is more challenging. It's incredibly cumbersome. So there's got to be a better way of being able to make it easier to be able to get through the system. It's a system of attrition in many cases, and too many veterans just give up. You know, after the first denial, the second denial, they're like, I'm done. Right. And we've got to figure out a better way to do that.
Allison, as far as we're in a very changing, evolving world, especially with AI, combat has changed a lot since when you served in Iraq. I mean, where are we going from here? We have foreign policy challenges around the globe, and I was mentioning earlier that, like, yes, Trump got elected mostly because of domestic issues, but the foreign policy challenges are great, and that obviously has a huge effect on recruitment as well as veteran care.
Well, to your point about how warfare is changing, I mean, just over the last couple of decades, you know, when I was on ground in Iraq, we went through probably 3 or 4 different iterations of body armor and also, you know, technology that helped scramble IEDs and IED triggers in just a year's worth of time. It is, you know, the warfare has transformed ever since in a way that Brian is way more intelligent on than I am because he was recently in the Pentagon. But it's, you know, it's wild that you can actually have somebody who is a UAV pilot serving in Tampa Bay right now who can execute and neutralize terrorist threats in the Middle East. So, you know, that is a fundamentally different environment that we're operating in right now.
Right.
And I think it also comes with, like, unique challenges. You know, our generation of veterans have deployed over and over again in ways that other generations didn't. You know, you also have, I'll give you a good example. You have the UAV pilot who is told that there's a threat somewhere, and then CNN reports that it wasn't a terrorist. It was a dad and his children. And the mental health implications of somebody carrying out their duty and finding out, regardless of the great intelligence that we have, that they unintentionally impacted an innocent civilian's lives, like, that is not only just a unique challenge, but it's also a very isolating challenge that UAV pilot is dealing with, and also dealing with at their home while it's being litigated in the national news media. So there are things like that that are still, you know, I think, dynamics that we have to continue to watch, at least when it comes to what the warfighter is experiencing throughout all of this. You know, in addition to just the impact of multiple tours on especially the special operations community. The last thing I would say is, you know, I think one of the things that's very important to our members and is a priority for our organization right now is we are fighting terrorism right now under authorizations of military force that have been left open-ended since 2001 and 2002. I think most of our members are not doves by any mean, but they do believe that Congress has a responsibility towards those who are serving today and their families to appropriately debate and authorize when they're sent into harm's way. And I think it doesn't get enough attention, but there are troops in Iraq and in Syria right now who are deployed under a authorization of military force that was passed after 9/11 to authorize the Afghanistan war. And we all know the state of the Afghanistan war right now. So I'll leave it there.
Anyone else want to jump in on that as far as like revising 20-year-old laws?
Yeah, I will not jump in on the law piece, but just to highlight what Allison was talking about on the changing on the warfare and how it changes to the healthcare piece. That example that she was going through with the UAV pilot, right? So think about the UAV pilot, as she said, who in today's battlefield is in combat, literally in combat. But not only are they home, they have to watch TV, they go home to their family that night. They have to integrate back with their family in their home that very night. So the mental health challenges, the stress challenges are different, and the stress of, are you considered the same level of warrior if you were doing it from the desert in Nevada as you were if you were in the streets in Baghdad? That is a big mental health issue, and it is something we're going to have to start wrestling with as we do more AI stuff, as we do more info warfare, as we do more UAV things, and something that we'll have to watch as our VSO and MSO organizations dealing with the VA and how they deal with the health issues that those folks have might be a little bit different than what it was before.
Congressman Mouton was talking about the mental health challenges he encountered, first presidential candidate to acknowledge, not admit really, saying, hey, listen, I needed help. Where are we on that? He mentioned that COVID has changed the game. We do a lot of mental health events, and we've seen some real progress, but who wants to jump in on that?
I know that the congressman mentioned the stigma has maybe lessened. I would have to disagree.
Okay.
Just because I'm at Camp Lejeune, right? And we're seeing people, we're talking to service members every day, and whether it's someone who, a junior enlisted or a junior officer, all the way up to a senior enlisted or a senior officer, they are still hesitant to relay any mental health challenges. They are still hesitant to relay the fact that they have been exposed to IED blasts numerous times, not just once, twice. They're still referring to it as, I just got my bell rung. Or they're just saying, oh, this happened, or it was just a little bit of something. And even as you hear, as part of a retention tool, sometimes mental health specialists will refer to as stress related to work instead of calling it post-traumatic stress disorder. So there's a lot of different varying things that, apply to the stigma, or the culture hasn't changed as yet, right? And so I think there's a long way to go to where we get service members to be able to speak to what's going on without affecting their careers on a long-term basis. And until that specifically changes inside DOD, we'll see more people transitioning out of the military, hesitant to say what's actually going on with them, and VA won't be able to treat them the way that they should, because it still exists today. It's 2024, people are still struggling. Same thing with service members who experience military sexual trauma. They're still afraid to say what's wrong, what happened. And it's both men and women. There's a stigma that it's mainly women who experience these things. And so I hear what he's saying. I heard him earlier, but I promise you today, as we deal with active duty service members transitioning and filing VA claims, they're still hesitant to talk about mental health concerns.
Allison, and then actually, you want to start and jump in right there? Yeah.
Okay. I would say that we have a very large investment in mental health care, and we see great work being done both within the VA and in the community. But there's a national shortage of mental health providers, and so we have to, in my opinion, the space needs to embrace access to great care, but also having agility with how care is delivered and where it is delivered. We find that a lot of the warriors that we serve do talk about it, and they are willing to share their story. The sooner that they can share their story and another warrior sees themselves in that story, then it goes to what you were talking about with the stigma. It's like, okay, I see myself in that person, I'll get to help. But I would say the VA Careers Act is helpful in terms of getting the proper pay for those professionals to choose serving veterans as their career path. But it's not just a veteran problem, it's a national problem. But I think there's actually a ton of innovation that's being done within our Warrior Care Network, where we're looking at how to be more precise with the care. They get a year's worth of care in 2 weeks. That type of innovation in lots of other organizations are doing very innovative things as well. It needs to be embraced as the entire way that we serve veterans. That's what I think.
Go to Allison and then Danny.
Well, I was just going to make a couple of points. One, I think it's yes and. I think the congressman got out as a company grade officer as I did, and if this, like, it's possible that the stigma has changed for our generation, but until our generation is in the top of the leadership in DoD, can they culturally change the entire organization? So it just takes time. The other thing I would say too is I remind people, especially lawmakers, that the military is 85% male, and it's not beta males who are signing up to join the military. And so, like, you can destigmatize it all you want, but people who are tough, who've survived combat in many cases, like, I think it's just hard to accept on a very human level that you might be struggling in that way. Right. And I just think that that's normal. And so it's possible that we could have also destigmatized it, but destigmatized it for other people, but not ourselves. You know what I mean?
Right.
Which doesn't mean that, like, it can just be hard for anybody, and myself included, who've dealt with mental health challenges. Like, it can just be hard to just accept at a basic level that is a struggle that you're having, Right.
I was just going to dovetail directly off of that. I mean, it's the stigma that's associated not just with the system or with the community, but also oneself. In my community, we've got to face the double stigma of not just, veterans and military members that are stigmatized by reaching out and asking for help, but within the macho community that I serve, getting them to the point where they can raise their hand and say, I don't feel right. There's something going on. Getting them to that point is a challenge, and that leads to other issues. That leads to substance use disorder. That leads to domestic abuse. That leads to a whole host of other pathologies that are manifesting themselves in ways that our communities need to be able to address. There's a practical element to it too, that making sure that clearances are not denied as a result of seeking out mental health services. For those that are seeking civilian careers in the intelligence community. So there's a lot of practical matters. We know that every time we see a jobless veteran, that's awful. Every time that there's a homeless veteran, that's horrible. But every time a veteran takes his or her own life because they didn't access the mental health services that they needed, that's a national tragedy. We need to do better.
As far as one thing I wanted to talk about, and Cindy, I liked your anecdote about having to tell people, hey, this is what's going on, because we've all called customer service for a variety of reasons, and they say, go to the internet. And a lot of veterans are older. My family, they don't know how to use the internet, and they're clicking on the wrong thing, and they get hacked all the time. Especially if they're older. And how do you reach them? Especially, Danny mentioned substance abuse. How do you reach that withdrawn? It's not an easy question, but withdrawn veteran who's, he's suffering from loneliness, substance abuse. How do you reach that person? Maybe that person's in their 70s or 80s. Any thoughts from anyone on that?
I think that's difficult because, listen, I call my 23-year-old my IT support, right? and
mine's 25.
And I just figured out how to screen share, and so she's like, push the button, which one? And
right.
And so thankfully I have IT support, and IT support walks me through how to do things on the phone. But with the VFW specifically, thank God we have our posts at our local posts, and older veteran can walk into one of our older posts and they find that camaraderie. They can, whether it's they see steak night, they can drive over, they can drive in, and they're going to be welcomed in, and they can enjoy a steak, they can enjoy a cup of coffee, and just get what they're missing, right? And to try to do away with that loneliness and get someone who's going to talk to them about all the old war stories, and it goes on and on and on, trust me. And so, and it's a good feeling. And sometimes that's what you need, because they're going to find someone they can go on a walk with, they're going to sit down and read the newspaper with still, and they don't have a phone in front of them. And so that's what we provide. It's a nice, soft place to land. and not just for the older generation, but for the young guy who misses it. I remember a friend of mine retired as an EA, and he was like, Cindy, don't you miss this? And I was like, no, I don't. And I was ready to transition, but I was looking at him like, what's wrong with you? But VFW is for someone like him. EA kind of probably thought he was going to make it to the E9 and didn't, but needed something else, right? And that's what VFW provides. Anywhere USA. I went to Korea for work, and I went to the VFW at Camp Humphreys, Osan Air Base. It was one outside the gate, and they were talking about military stuff. And I was standing there like, oh, y'all guys, you really do this? And so that's what that's for.
There's another aspect, but I hope the new administration will keep this at the VA. And Allison, I know you know, but they have this chief experience office at the VA, right? And so one of the premises that it recognizes is connecting and getting information to the different groups is not a one-size-fits-all, right?
Okay.
That you have different, the discussion that you have with the 80-year-old at the VFW is different than the discussion that Allison has with a 25-year-old at the IAVA, right? And so their grade, their report card is based on what is the experience for somebody who connects with VA? What is the experience for a 25-year-old looking for how they get their benefits? What's the experience for a 50-year-old? What's the experience for a 58-year-old? What's the experience for a 70-year-old and an 80-year-old? But understanding and recognizing that they're not a one-size-fits-all, that you have to go for different methods, different ways to communicate and get information to all those different sources, I think is really powerful, right? I think it's the chief experience officer and holding the chief experience officer accountable for recognizing what is the experience of the person connecting to the VA is something that really, I think, it's leaped them forward a little bit, and I hope they continue to do forward going.
Well, give you the last word.
Yeah, one final point. Jen made a reference to this earlier, but I'm a big proponent in educating the people who love veterans. So children, caregivers, et cetera, especially because when they find their moment of powerlessness, they might not have the information that they need. But if their kid does, or if their kid can say, like, Dad, you need to get help. Like, those are the people who can help the veterans the most. And so educating that population is as important as trying to get information to the veterans.
That's a very good point. Very good point. We have run out of time. Please thank our excellent panel for a great conversation. Hey, thanks, Brian. Thanks. Yeah, it was well done. Well done.